Hey guys, just to let you know that Borderlands and The Last Ones are on Tubi right now. That's Tubi. It's a streaming service. You probably have it on your PlayStation or on your phone. Check it out. The Last Ones is a zombie drama. It's in black and white. The first black and white zombie movie, I think it is. I'm not gonna check though, or you know. And also, Borderland is a mexploitation film about the cartels, and it's a lot of fun. And if you're like, hey, I want to learn about how El Paso is, well, don't watch my film because it's not like how it is at all. But if you want to watch a fun movie set in El Paso, check it out. It's a lot of fun. Borderland and The Last Ones on Tubi. Check them out now. And now, let's start with the show. Ha ha ha! What a hilarious intro that I did. I would go buy those movies if I was a new listener. Guys, welcome to the Bomb Squad. My name is Andrew Joseph Jara,
Wait, aren't they on Tubi? You're not
and I've
buying anything.
directed two movies that are on Tubi, and also they're for sale. So if anyone tells you
Oh,
that they're not buying anything, then they're dumb as dirt. But we are doing a movie we don't usually do. We don't usually do dramas or war movies because Andrew does not like war movies unless they're about doing a lot of heroin in the jungles to stop Marlon Brando, which this movie kind of is about
I was
that.
gonna say technically that kind of is, yeah. But
But we wanted to talk about this movie A because it's Black History Month, B because Josh hasn't seen it, and C because I feel like this is truly underappreciated, both in critic wise and viewer wise, and I think we need to talk about it. Even though I hate the directors for following one of my best friends in the world, but we'll get to that. So today on the Bomb Squad, we're talking about the 1995 movie Dead Presidents, directed by the people that everyone hates, the Hughes Brothers, who famously got in a fight with Tupac Shakur, but they are still good directors. And this movie stars Keith David, the amazing Keith David, the
it's another,
amazing,
connection to the Riddick too.
yes, two Keith David movies in a row, amazing. The amazing Chris Tucker, and also Freddie Rodriguez. We got a Mexican in the house. Freddie Rodriguez, you'll know from our future episode of Harsh Times. And it also stars, yeah, Lorenz Tate should be more successful. I think it's weird that he like shows up randomly and stuff, but he he's always good. I don't know why he isn't more popular.
It's-
And then it stars Clifton Powell, who's a badass. Terrence Howard, oh my god.
I know. I always like to see Terrence Howard and Bokeem Woodbine, who's also one of those like
Bokeem Woodbine.
he
Also,
just pops up.
I
And I
just
was
want
like,
to
oh,
point out to podcast listeners, I didn't get one name wrong. But we're doing this for Black History Month because it's Black History Month. We want to obviously spotlight a black movie, and this one's very not just in plot or in cast and crew, but in plot. Josh, tell us what this movie's about.
Black Vietnam veterans take back what's theirs. I didn't know this was a period piece until I started watching it. I was pleasantly
Okay, well let's
surprised.
let's start getting into it because that is one of the things. This movie was like panned and did poorly in the box office, and it hasn't really gotten the cult following even. But it's really good. But that is one of the things is that if you watch the original trailer or marketing, maybe it was just the marketing, and maybe I just didn't see trailers at this time because it was made in what 1995, so I was like 11 years old. But like the poster, the marketing, it makes it seem like this movie is about a robbery, kind of like Ocean's 11.
Yeah,
But it's not about that. I mean, it is about a robbery, but that's like so it's like not really what the movie's about. It just happens in the movie. And so I feel like everyone who was kind of going into this movie expecting like a fun robbery, like or even like a cool action
like a
movie.
good Takers. Like if
Yeah,
Takers was good, yeah.
I would have been like that seems cool. And then I watched it and I was like, okay, what the fuck is this movie about? But it's good. It's still good. It's just like, yeah, I feel like a lot of critics were not expecting this. I know when I saw it the first time, I was definitely not expecting this movie, but I was pleasantly surprised. And then we'll talk a little bit about critic reception. But yeah, so okay, so the movie is about it's about three friends. It's Freddie Rodriguez, Chris Tucker, and Lorenz Tate are like they all live in the same neighborhood. and it's like 1968, and they're just kind of like, they're just kind of high school kids, like the last year, and like the Vietnam War's looming.
I ain't fighting no white man's war. Shit, them Viet Congs, Chungs, whatever the fuck, ain't done shit to me.
And so, like, yeah, the first part is almost like not romantic comedy, but it definitely feels like a teen. Like, this is how your life is when you're a teenager. Like, you don't think anything's gonna ever happen bad. You have like these grand schemes, like Chris Tucker, like Josh was saying, like his plan is to go to college to learn how to be a really good pimp and do
Yeah.
and do like treat his
Well,
women right and
and
like
that was like the interesting thing is as they're doing this, what I assumed would happen, I just thought all the Vietnam, like kind of them like debating like the merits of Vietnam was just kind of one of those like, oh, it's set in the 60s. This is like what people would be taught. And then I thought like, oh, they're gonna find a reason they need to get money. But then it just hard cuts to them in Vietnam, and I'm like, oh,
yeah, and I do like that. I was talking about that, a similar thing that Quentin Tarantino does in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where it's like all of a sudden it just hardcore cuts to like violence. And
yeah,
I think that that's super effective because when you think about it, like most violence, especially stuff like going to war or the Manson family breaking into your house, it's random. Like it just happens all of a sudden. So it's
yeah.
like this is how fucking fast this shit goes, and I think that that's a super effective way to tell it. But yes, they end up all in Vietnam. Skip and Anthony Curtis end up on the same platoon, I guess. Okay, so they end up in the same platoon, and they're just kind of, and they're also there with Bokeem Woodbine, who plays Cleon.
Cleon, yeah, he's a preacher's son who's
He's a preacher's son who definitely loses it in the war. And now, and since like, and so they're there, and like the first scene is like they have like a white commander, and he's like taking the belt off of one of the Viet Cong that they've murdered. He's taking the belt off him, and he's like, "Oh, this guy was a sergeant. I'm gonna save this as a souvenir. I've been collecting them." And then Cleon is like, "Oh, too bad you didn't get one, Cleon." And then so Cleon goes to one of the other soldiers, and he cuts off his head.
well, he kind of has like late because he at the near the end he's like the moral like voice of like what we're doing is wrong.
Yeah, there is that juxtaposition where he is the father, or he's the son of a preacher's man,
Yeah, his father's a reverend.
and they're both doing something grotesque, but also it kind of highlights that like if you go to war with someone, and I didn't even realize this until I was heavily involved with someone who did go to war, but like it's kind of like going to summer camp, or like I don't know. It's just like a weird situation where you're with like 10 random people, however many people are in your platoon, that you don't know, like in any way. And you're like in this situation where you really have to, like, not only like work with this guy, but trust him in a weird way, you know? And like, I think that that's not really covered a lot. Like, every time we see it in movies,
When they're talking, like he's talking to Chris Tucker, like Lorenz Tate, he's like we'll worry about the world like once we get back to it. Like you just focus on like what you're doing right now. Like there's like no reason to even think about like life back home is kind of how he frames it. And I'm like that is interesting, you know.
yeah, how they both look at it, because Chris Tucker is like he spends all his time getting high.
Yeah, he immediately is like, I'm gonna get as high as possible, and he like
Yeah.
fucks a prostitute, and then it's just like it is funny because it's like that is how like you would cope in that situation, you know?
And then they have like this scene, like right after the Chris Tucker "I'm gonna go get high" scene, and they're like trying to persuade, they're trying to persuade, uh, what's his name, Cleo, to throw away the head because it's
Yeah,
been weeks and it stinks.
I don't want to pull rank, Cleon, but if you don't get rid of that fucking head,
I don't hear nobody else complaining but you.
well, maybe you should listen to your team.
Medical advice, Cleon. You dump that shit.
Hey, Doc, shut the fuck up. You don't know shit.
Like they're all handling him with kid gloves, which you would, because again he has like a human head in his back pocket. But like again, it is so weird. Like if you put this scene in like not at war, it wouldn't make sense for someone to cut off someone else's head and everyone else is like treating him like he's very
They're like
sensitive.
rolling their eyes at it, like, come on.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, like it's like someone has like a bad haircut that you don't want to talk about or something. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's such a good it's such a good way to like show how weird being at war is. And how alone you really feel. But then Cleon doesn't want to get rid of it because he says a good luck charm, and then he does. And then like the next scene is literally them then getting attacked, and that's when Christopher gets killed. And so it cuts back to when they're back in the neighborhood, and they're all kind of like, well, it's Anthony Curtis, and he's trying to meet everyone. They find out that Jose, who's Freddie Rodriguez's character, had left before because he got injured. And so eventually Skip leaves, and then so Anthony Curtis is the last one to come in. And he's like, he's there, and he finds, well, the first person he goes up to is Terrence Howard. And we didn't talk about this, but originally Terrence Howard was like the young whipperscrapper or whatever, like, and they had gotten in a fight before
He's
about,
like a pool shark bully type of guy.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
again, it's so good the way he's reintroduced, because the first time they're introduced, they like kind of get in a fight, and fucking Terrence Howard like pulls a gun, or he like threatens Anthony
No,
Curtis.
he pulls a knife and like kind
Pulls a
of
knife.
like he cuts him a little on the cheek just to be like,
Yeah, just to kind of be like, hey, I'm stronger than you. And then when he sees him again, he's like, oh my god, it's my friend. And like he treats him like they haven't seen each other in forever, but they're not friends. It's like such, but like I've been in that situation too, when you go back and you meet someone and they're like, hey, what's going on, man? How are you? And you're like, we weren't friends before.
yeah, just that kind of like I knew you once.
But like coming back years later, it just feels like that. And now Chris Tucker is like fully addicted to heroin.
Well,
And
and
like
he's like I'm having really bad dreams. It's not the heroin though, and it's like he's referencing PTSD, but I don't think they called it that yet.
I don't think
You
they
know,
had a name for it at that time.
he's just like I just wake up every night, like
With chills and shit. Well,
yeah.
and because he's on 100% medical leave, so he's just hanging around, which is actually way worse for him because he just has all the time to do heroin. And he literally tells them like, "Oh no, it's not the heroin, it's it's the PTSD." And like, it's such a crazy idea to think again, like just like the way that people were abandoned. So then he meets, and I'm trying to get through the plot because I do want to talk about the theme rushing through. So
Yeah, it
he meets.
actually, I mean, honestly, it kind of speeds up at this point because like he's back in his life, but is like, oh, he has a kid. He,
He had a kid, and we find out in Vietnam, but he didn't want to see her ever. And so
yeah,
when he gets back, he finally
she
goes to
got
see her,
pregnant. Yeah,
and he finds out that she has a new guy named Cuddy, who's it's not really she doesn't really have a new guy. She just has a guy who likes to have sex with her, and like kind of he doesn't really treat her like a prostitute.
he
He's like a sugar daddy, if anything.
yeah he gives her money and is just kind of like nice to her and comes around, but they're not like dating. I don't know.
Yeah, but they
It's
are fucking.
yes,
And so, like, obviously, Anthony Curtis finds this highly disrespectful. And so he's trying to get a job. He goes to Keith David, and Keith David's like, oh, the pigs ran me out. Um, and so, like, he can't get a job with Kirby. So he eventually, like, gets a job, like, as a butcher. And he's, like, not making any money. And he's seen, like, Cuddy is still, like, paying. And he gets his girl pregnant again. And so, like, they're essentially, like, losing money, like, all the time. Like, they're super poor, and he can't even like get a job, and now he's starting to have PTSD because he starts getting nightmares. And then so they kind of decide to, one of the best scenes, like, Cuddy like is walking out of his apartment as he's coming home, and he kind of taunts him, and then he throws him down the stairs.
Don't you ever in your fucking life bite the hand that feeds you, nigga.
which is like kind of like it is true, and it's like obviously it's kind of like difficult to say like I mean, it's like obviously like you're looking at a movie made in 1995 about what Vietnam, where we all like knew it was bullshit by then. But I would like to think most people were kind of like, oh, this is pretty much bullshit back then too. You know?
Yeah, and also, okay, so we talked about Juanita Benson, who's Anthony Curtis's girlfriend, but we don't talk about Delia Benson, who's a sister, and she kind of has a crush on Anthony Curtis. She's had it since they were kids, but when he gets back, she's become like a full blown communist, And
Oh
I'm like
yeah,
surprised that this movie it's not very critical of communism.
yeah. It even it just kind of like it should because they like attend a meeting, right, and they don't like super get involved with it, but they are like kind of like it's not seen as like a bad thing essentially.
So he tries not to like get involved. But then they realize that none of them have any money. So they hook back up with Jose, who's had his arm blown off, but he's like a weapons expert. And they're like, we're going to rob this armored truck. So they figure out that they need. So it's Anthony Curtis, Chris Tucker, Skip, Jose, Kirby, and they decide that they need two other people. So they get Delia Benson to join, and then they get Cleon, which I have no idea why they decided to get Cleon.
Yeah, he really doesn't help.
Well, not only does he not help, but like when they get back, Cleon goes full blown into being a pastor, and he's like,
Which is funny, like considering his past. Yeah.
well, it's not only yeah, and it's kind of like, of course, but also it's so weird because now he's like, oh well, I don't want to hurt anyone, and like we have to do everything for God, which he kind of was. Well, he was doing the second part in his own way,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's kind of funny to see how like useless he is. So they decide to rob the place, or they're gonna rob this armored truck, and then like everything goes wrong, of course, as well.
We should say they kill a lot of people during the
Yes, they
robbery,
kill like four.
but it
Oh,
is successful. They do get the money
they do get the
in.
money, and then so yeah, so that's the plot. But we really want to get into the themes of this movie, and I think like I was reading some of the reviews, and they were kind of like, oh, this movie's all over the place and it doesn't really know what it wants to be. And I think that the problem is this movie is about how America throws our veterans, especially our veterans of color, away. And it's not like a fun movie. It's not like, I mean, it has fun parts, but it's not like you don't leave, you feel kind of gross leaving because of how everyone's treated.
Well, and they even like spell it out because when he's being sentenced, it's actually Martin
Yeah.
Freeman, which I thought is funny
No, it's Martin
because he's in
Sheen.
the Martin Sheen, not
It's
Martin
Martin
Freeman.
Freeman
That
is a little kid.
he's a 5 year old. No, no, it's Martin Sheen who's
That's a great
was in
scene.
the greatest Vietnam film of all time. Is like the judge,
Hot
and
Shots Part Two.
he even snidely is like, "Oh, I fought." He's like, "I'm a Marine too. I fought in World War II, a real war." So it's like, man, even other veterans are just shitting on these guys. It's like, oh, it was fake what you did over there, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's a great scene because yeah, he tells them like, "Oh, I fought in World War II, and you lost respect, sir," and like he's telling them all these things like, "Oh, I gained all this experience over there," but he never realizes that the white experience, even though they were different wars, the white experience of being a veteran and the black experience for being a veteran are very different experiences, and so he wants to relate to them on this thing that they're the same while ignoring the things that makes them different, and you can't do that. You have to take that into consideration. I think that's why there's so much like there's a lot of people who it's the same argument when people are like, oh well, there are poor whites, so how can there be poor whites? Like, yeah, I mean there are poor whites and they do have a struggle, but they don't have to worry about also racism. And I think that that's kind of what this whole movie's about. It doesn't like tell you, and it doesn't even show you the other side to see how good it is. I think it expects you to know, especially
Yeah, but
like working in.
it is one of those things though where it is almost like that's very like common sense if you think about it, but it's also like forgotten. Like I think weirdly a large amount of people don't realize that that's exactly what the first Blood is about, the first Rambo movie, you
Yeah.
know?
And I think like of course Rambo is super poignant and I think it's amazing. But I think this movie is also important because like in Rambo John Rambo was always going to kind of be a bum because he's just not that smart of a guy. Like he like and he kind of mentions it like that when he was at war he was this, but like I think that's why it's so important to show Anthony Curtis's and even Skip's like life before they go to war because they had
Yeah.
potential. They were smart guys who knew how to do things. They probably could have gotten a good job, and it's just like the Marines changed them and it kind of ruined their lives, and then they caught back and their lives were ruined. Where Rambo's life, you kind of get the impression that his life was better in the war,
Well, they reinforce that in the sequels too, but
Well, the
yeah,
sequels
like
don't count as
right
spin-offs.
as actual commentary on war. No, I agree, but it's also like yeah, you do get the sense that he's someone who was kind of made for it and can't like function out of it. But it is hard to imagine what the John Rambo would be before the Vietnam War. You know,
I think that this movie is important. And I think that's why critics didn't like it because honestly, this movie is like an indictment of the American capitalist system and how we treat so many people and how we're like how easy it is to throw people away. Again, it's so important how we see them trying to get jobs. These guys don't want, to be millionaires. They literally just want to be able to support their wives without Cuddy getting in the way. These guys have this idea of what it means to be like a father and what it means like for masculinity, and they were in the war being like quote unquote masculine men, and they get back and all that power has been stripped of them, and like how do you deal with that fact? Rambo, of course, is like all about this, but this movie also touches on it. Like, how do you deal with the fact that you were in a war, you were literally in charge of whether people lived or died, and now you get back and you're like the second assistant to the butcher, The Hughes brothers, obviously, they made Menace to Society, and I hate to do this. I hate to be this guy, Joshua. Just know that I hate being this guy before I say this, okay?
all right, I'm ready.
In The Dark Knight, when the Joker says you blow up a bus full of soldiers and no one gives a shit, because when it's in Menace to Society and you see like these guys being gangsters and shooting each other and stuff, it's like, yeah, that's how it was, that's how it is for poor gangsters in like LA and stuff. But when you see these kids from like, I think they're in Brooklyn, when you see them in like New York, and they go from being like happy kids to coming back and they're literally like have no problem shooting an innocent security guard, it's a fucking hard thing to take, and it's like a hard thing to wrap your mind around, because in your mind there's always that want to be separated from the evil, like
I
pretend.
think part of it too is also like the 90s was far enough removed from Vietnam that like kind of like the general cultural thing was like, oh, we can like make jokes about crazy Vietnam vets. So to see a movie where it's like, no, here's like realistically how they suffered, people like, we don't need that. You know, it's like
Yeah,
they almost like
we're okay.
dismiss it because like we're over Vietnam. It's just like a funny little thing now. We don't have to like get into the
Yeah, we're never
horrors.
gonna get into another war for bullshit political reasons. Okay, so when they do the robbery, and this is probably what most people remember about this movie, they have makeup and it's like white.
Like Ghostface
Yeah,
kind of.
like they're not trying to look like white people. It's like literally white, like a piece of paper, and they have like colored their eyes, so it kind of looks like a skull almost. And so it doesn't even really make sense in terms of like if you're doing a robbery, why would you paint a mask that draws more attention to your face? But it makes sense in the context of the movie because it's like they're putting on this like kind of facade to like get back to normal, and it like doesn't work because you can't.
Yeah, like I mean, in their minds, they're like, "Oh, this will hide our identities, so we can get away," and then they just immediately start killing everyone, so it doesn't really matter.
And
But
also, three of their members aren't wearing it, so they just look like regular people.
right, so yeah, it was very weird.
But since we're here, okay, so Yo MTV Raps. We're gonna talk about this for a second.
Yeah, I don't know
It was
anything
like,
about
okay, so
this.
Yo MTV Raps a fucking TRL. Like all they did was show music videos,
I've
and
seen
then
it.
like,
Yeah, I
yeah, they would
am
have
familiar with it.
like
Yeah.
stars on and be like, "Hey, tell us about this new thing." Okay, so Tupac Shakur was originally supposed to be in Menace to Society, but then he got fired. The Hughes brothers fired him for some reason. And so he was on Yo MTV Raps, and so they're playing videos. And every time they cut back to Tupac Shakur, because he had just run into them, and he was like, his actual quote was,
They fired me, but did it in a roundabout punk snitch way. So I caught them on the streets and beat they behind.
and like Ed Lover was the host, and he's literally like, if you watch the footage, he's literally trying to cover Tupac's mouth to keep Tupac from talking, but Tupac refuses to stop talking about it. And so, yeah, they ended up using that footage in court.
Oh, he
to
incriminated
convince
himself.
Tupac of assault, and he served 15 days in jail. And I think it was either right after when he served, it was right after or right before he got shot. But I just think that it's like, I mean, if you know anything about Tupac, you knew that he was a little bit irrational. He kind of did,
Somewhat volatile, yeah.
yeah, he did some volatile shit. But I always think that that's super interesting. Just like the way that like pop culture intersects, where like obviously the Hughes brothers were making like these kind of gritty movies, but the fact that they got in a physical fight with Tupac Shakur is just like such a like Tupac was just fighting everyone. That's why it's always funny, like when Kanye West like goes after Billie Eilish and people are like, "Why are you doing this?" It's like, I mean, they just kind of cross over. I like it's still stupid. Don't get me wrong, but it's not out of the realm of possibilities that like they'll run into each other and get in a for like some kind of altercation.
This one's called Roughneck. I'm gonna catch y'all in traffic and I'm gonna be the roughest neck. Come on.
Yeah.
They just all like Hollywood small guys. But yeah, Dead President. It's a good movie. This is a lot more serious of an episode than I wanted to usually have.
Well,
But I
it's a
think
more serious movie that I thought I was walking into. So.
yeah, and I think it's kind of funny because it does fit into our socialist crimes of capitalism playlist that we have going on, which includes the East and Copland. Next week we are talking about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, directed
Yeah.
by David Garcia, a Mexican, so you know it's going to be good. We might have some special guests. We're still trying to figure it out. It might be a podcast exclusive, and by might I mean definitely. But come back next week, and we're going to have a lot of fun with that movie. Or maybe it'll be boring. Has there been a boring Texas Chainsaw, Josh?
No, they're all interesting. Even the ones I disliked. It's
think,
like this is
yeah.
bad in an interesting way. Yeah.
I think the good thing about like why horror will always be the best genre is because usually they're so short that by the time you realize that they're not saying anything and not about anything, it's over.
Well, and I think what's interesting too is
You don't
like
have to watch the Ricardos for 2 hours before you realize you're wasting your time.
because there's like eight Texas Chainsaw Massacres, right, or something, and it's like, but they're all pretty different in tone and everything. Whereas like every bad Saw movie is bad in almost the same way, but every bad
Yeah.
Texas movie is bad in a very different way. You know?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. And so let's see if this movie's good or if it's bad in a different way. I'll be
Yeah.
very disappointed if it's not bad. Like if it's bad, but like in a boring way, I'll be very disappointed. I'm going for I want it to either be good or
I
be
mean,
bad in a unique way.
I hope it's good, or I hope it's like Texas Chainsaw 2, almost good. You know?
Yeah. So join us for that. It'll be worth our time.
I hope they
your
bring
time.
back Chop Top. That's all I want.
Yeah, you know what? It's crazy that Chop Top is so popular and they've never brought him back. Like, just do it. Just
Yeah.
do it already. Make him a girl. I don't care. But yeah, we'll see you guys next week.